All right, today's video is going to focus how the brain processes language. We'll take a little deeper look at language a little bit later on in the course, and how it develops in children, and there's debates about whether or not the brain is hardwired for language or if it's something that we learn like many other things. So the first thing that you should understand about language in the brain is that it is primarily a left hemisphere operation. So when there is damage to the left hemisphere, specifically in some of the areas that I'll talk about in a minute, we see significant language impairment. Okay, so let's start with as you notice in this slide, these areas are numbered. Okay, so we're talking about in this case reading, as an element of language is reading. Okay? So the visual cortex is obviously needed to process anything that we see, including words. So there's a whole learning process, of course, behind that. Words are on the printed page are nothing more than, if you're looking at this slide, for example, these are just kind of really random shapes, but over time we learn that they associate these shapes with sounds, and then we put the sounds together and we have words and all that kind of stuff. So when we say that the written words, we're basically looking at the visual cortex is processing the size, the shape, the color, those kinds of things. And then the process kind of moves forward, okay? So we go from the visual cortex to what is called the Angular Gyrus. So if you just, I'm going to give you 10 seconds, 5 seconds to read the large print on this slide. Ready? And, well, don't read it out loud. Read it to yourself. Ready? Go. Okay. Now, I would imagine if your experience is like mine and others that I talk to, there's sort of a voice in your head, okay, that you are, it's auditory code, okay, so you hear that voice in your head. So what that is happening in the Angular Gyrus. So it's taking the written word and taking these visual representations and transforming them into auditory code or sound. Okay. Now, the next number 3 is called Wernicke's area. Okay. W German, so it's pronounced like with a V sound. Wernicke's area. So this interprets auditory code. All right. Now, as you're reading the printed page, the process starts back here, number 1. As you're listening to language, listening to my voice, then we kind of bypass 1 and 2 and go directly to number 3. So you're interpreting what I'm saying as I'm saying it. Okay. So the next process, next step in the process is number 4. That is Broca's area. Okay. So in Broca's area, I do that all the time, don't I? Okay, in Broca's area, this controls speech muscles via the motor cortex. So what's not evident here is that what is not evident in this slide is the fact that Broca's area also, you're coming up with the words that you want to say in the frontal lobe areas. Okay, so not only is you're figuring out what words you want to respond with, but then you have to form the the mouth and the tongue and the lips and the face, and to be able to say those words. So this is kind of a little bit misleading. Controls speech muscles via the motor cortex, and then it goes to the motor cortex. Yeah, so the frontal lobe Broca's area is kind of telling the motor cortex what words to say. So you really have to generate the speech. All right, so here are 3 examples: hearing words, okay, seeing words, Visual Cortex and Angular Gyrus, and speaking words, Broca's area and the motor cortex. So in the course of maybe reading and responding and or having a conversation, we might have A and C, or B and C, or typically we're, especially in a classroom situation, we might have all of these going on. Now, I thought I had a slide on. Let's go back to this slide. So you should be able to predict. You should be able to predict here what is happening, or what may happen as a result of trauma, okay, to any of these areas, okay, that we just went over. So if we have trauma to the auditory cortex or Wernicke's area, you might have difficulty with speech comprehension. If you have damage to the visual cortex or the angular gyrus, you are going to have a hard time reading. If you have trouble, or if you have damage to Broca's area or the motor cortex, you might have trouble speaking. Now, what's also kind of interesting, I think, to consider is that if you have trouble let's do B. If you have damage to this area and you have trouble reading, okay, that you very well might be able to understand by listening and being able to respond to what you're listening. But if you're asked to read something, that might prove difficult. Or you might be able to read and listen and have damage to Broca's area or the motor cortex, and you might have difficulty coming up with the words that you want to come up with to respond, or even just forming the words. So it might appear to the outside person that, hey, maybe you're not too smart, you can't even put a sentence together, but you very well could be comprehending at a high level and just have problems with Broca's area. So whole sorts of combinations of what are called language impairments, or a word that you might run across is aphasia, A-P-H-A-S-I-A, aphasia. And so you should have that understanding. If one of these areas are traumatized in some way, stroke, aneurysm, blunt object, whatever, you should be able to predict possibly then what the impairment might be. All right, so that's it for language.